I like to see people learn how to measure dispersion in the instruments, learn how to measure the bandwidth of the instrument, learn how to do Van Diemter plots. When you put the column in, run Van Diemter plots with the mixtures that you're trying to separate and see how well they hold up at higher and higher flow rates. That's what a Van Diemter plot is. You measure efficiency as a function of flow rate and see if that holds up. You can't assume it's going to hold up just because you've purchased a UHPLC column or a UHPLC instrument. Different solutes will behave differently, and you have to know what they are, what the performance of your solute mixture is. The other thing you need to be aware of, maybe not as important as the Van Diemter plot, but and the dispersion or the blank injection of a sample with no column, a measurement of the instrument bandwidth, but the Van Hoff plot. Van Hoff plot is a measure of the retention of a peak, the retention factor, retention time, if you will, as a function of temperature. So if you increase the flow rate in HPLC, you can increase temperature because of frictional heating. It's just like increasing the temperature of your oven. And if you do that and the solutes behave differently toward temperature, you could lose a separation at high flow that you gain at low flow just because the temperature has changed inadvertently during this experiment. And most people don't know what the true temperature in their column is anymore. But if you have a Van Hoff plot, you study it, a nice separation that you make, and you study the Van Hoff plot, hold the flow rate constant, change the temperature, and look at what happens as a function of temperature to K. And if peaks start to cross over one another, you know that that separation is not a good candidate for increasing the flow in UHPLC to the point where temperature might increase within the column. Or if you do see it, you might be able to understand why it occurs. This happens when solutes interact differently with the column. They're being retained about the same, but they are being retained by a different mechanism. And one mechanism will have a different Van Hoff plot than another mechanism. So instead of the plots being parallel, which is what we would like, they cross over one another, and there is at some point in temperature where the two peaks will no longer separate, but they will coalute and even cross over to the other side. Now you don't want that happening as a function of flow rate, but it could if the flow rate is generating enough temperature. And the only way you'll know that that might happen is by making a Van Hoff plot. So people have to do these crazy things that they never thought they'd have to do, and that's measure instrument dispersion, measure Van Diemter plots, and measure Van Hoff plots. But it's healthy. I mean, it's good. And there's no shortcut. A lazy person is not going to become a good chromatographer. And then I think I'd recommend that people get familiar with or refamiliarize themselves with how to use the mobile phase, because I don't think you're going to have a whole variety of stationary phases, a full complement of stationary phases on these new particles overnight. So the only alternative is to work with the C8, C18s, phenyls, those kinds of columns, but learn how to use the mobile phase variables.